I applied to Chuck Wilcox for full-time employment to work in the machine rooms. And once they said yes, you were on probation for 30 days, even though you'd been working for on and off for a year. In the summertime, you're started on probation as soon as they decided you were to be given a regular job. And they gave you a regular full-time card. And after 30 days, you also joined the union. You were not a union member till you passed your probation. And during that period, all the hourly workers, except for, I believe, the wharf, had to punch in at the beginning of their shift and punch out at the end. And this involved taking your time card from your slot on one board, putting in the time clock where a timestamp was put on it, would be registered, and then it was put in the slot on the other board. And then at the end of your shift, you reverse the process. This all took place in the time office, which was located behind the security office beside the mill main gate. And during the day, workers from the company office, payroll department, would collect the cards to record the shifts the person worked. And I do know there used to be people that used to go there a day shift and they'd go to the Rodney for beers at lunch, and then they would have somebody punch them out at the end of the day because they didn't go back in. It was more of a Wild West back in those days, I have to tell you that. But of course, when you're on probation and you're just starting out, no, you don't do that. And the machine rooms never could do that because you never left the machine. You were there the whole shift. Anyhow, we would receive the unique thing, I guess, at the time was, and I tell people and they go, really? We used to receive our pay every 2 weeks back on a Friday. And then we'd go to the payroll windows at the mill office building, and there would be two lines formed. One line, I believe, was A to, I think it was K, and then L to Z would be formed. So with me being Merrick, I would be in the certain line. And you get to the window and they gave you a pay envelope. And the pay envelope contained the amount of cash that you'd earned over the past 2 weeks. And I mean in cash, in dollars, bills, and coins. And that was how you got it. But a few years later, the company did away with the time card procedure, and they had the shift bosses record the hours of their workers, which I always thought, why did they do that in the first place? But I guess because in certain departments, you could take off and wander around and do stuff, and you didn't have to be there. I guess I was just used to working on the machines. And then shortly later on, they did away with the pay envelopes and they issued you a check. So you would go and line up in the two lines and they would give you your check. And of course, the banks were right by the mill office here in the town site. And I banked in the Bank of Montreal. So I'd be in the lineup outside the Bank of Montreal to get in there to deposit my check. And they were fairly long. Most time, it took you a while. But a few years later, the company instituted a direct deposit system, which certainly made life easier. Although I recall some workers at union meetings complaining that they didn't like that system because as their wives would know how much they made. And I thought that was, well, that's an old way of thinking. And in those days, there were two unions in the mill. The one was Local 1, the International Brotherhood of Paper Makers and Paper Workers, and Local 76 of the International Brotherhood of Pulp, Sulfite, and Paper Mill Workers. When I got hired on regularly, working on the paper machines, I became a member of Local 1 in July of 1965. And during the first month, when I was working full-time or getting my card after I was assigned to shifts in the old mill and both the new mill, the old mill and the new mill. Once you become a regular crew member, I worked on 5 and 6 paper machines. And there were 4 crews in those days. They were A, B, C, and D, and they rotated 5 consecutive shifts of 5-day shifts from 7 till 3, afternoons from 3 to 11, and graveyards from 11 till 7. And one of the crews would be on days off. And we worked 8 hours with the coffee and lunch breaks part of the shift. So if there were any problems on the machine, if there were breaks, you didn't get a break. And you worked on the same crew until such time as your seniority put you on a different crew. In other words, somebody quit. Pretty well, if somebody quit, or if somebody got sick, you could be moved up on a different crew. And that means you'll be working on a newer, faster machine, which may mean you made more money. But all of the paper makers, they really watched the seniority lists and assigned machine positions on them, because they were posted on the notice board in every one of the machine rooms. And you could go there, and they would be posted for a week ahead, or 2 weeks, I can't remember. You'd look there and see where you were going to be working. And God help the boss or the scheduler, whose name was Jerry Ball. He was a really nice guy. I never wanted his job. And if they put you on somebody was junior to you and they put them on a higher paying job, oh no. Things had to be changed around right away. So you'd go right to the boss machine tender, or the shift boss. And there was a seniority list for both the old mill and the new mill. And as I said, I like working on the machines, enjoyed the camaraderie of the guys. And one of the things that was nice at Christmas was the shift boss would always invite all of his crew, along with wives and girlfriends, to their house for a party. And it was always a really good time. It was just like, all the bosses that I worked for, and I think most of them were pretty good. There was a couple of them that were a bit of dicks, but And all over the years, I worked on all 9 paper machines in various positions, from broadcaster to winderman. And on one shift, because of vacation leave, and there's some people off sick, I was assigned as a back tender on number 1 paper machine. I was kind of proud that I was doing the same job that my great uncle Gus had done back in the early years of the mill. Of course, I was very nervous that day when the boss said, "Chris, you're back tending on number 1." I was like, oh my God, I'd done it when I was a winderman there, just relieving the back tender. But when it's your job for the whole shift, I was a little nervous, but nothing went wrong. And it was the only time I ever did that. It was the highest position I ever held. The highest position I ever held regularly with fourth hand in the old mill. And when the company decided to shut down 1 to 4 machines, the 2 seniority lists were amalgamated, which at the time caused a lot of discussion and some bad feelings between the fellows from both mills. And we couldn't understand. We talked to one of our superintendents, Tommy Waldron, who was a pretty straight shooter, and he told us the machines were making money. 1 to 4 were making money, but they weren't making as much money as the company wanted. Therefore, they were going to shut them down and take them apart, and they sold them to some company in China, from what we were told. So I went back to the new mill again, and eventually was working regularly on number 9 machine, which is where he made the most money. And it was during this time that number 10 paper machine was being built. And it was really kind of cool watching the machine, sort of a process of a whole new paper machine rising from the basement. And we would talk to the crews and that, and it was really something to see. But before it was ready to start, a number of months before they were ready to start up number 10, the 4 senior crews from number 9, we were given training for each area that we'd be working on, from broadcaster to machine tender. And we were told that we would, and it was in agreement with the union, we were told that we would be frozen in our job on number 10 until such time as the company felt that the machine was running successfully. But we would be paid any difference in pay that we may have been entitled to from, say, working over at a higher job over in 5 to 8 machines, and that, so that we would be paid whatever our seniority would have put us at. It was not a real smooth startup. From my understanding, talking to the guys that I know, when number 11 started up, it was a heck of a lot smoother. But number 10, we had many breaks, either wet end breaks, dryers, calendar stacks, or the winder. And I have to tell you, there was a lot of nights, a lot of shifts, day shifts included, when we all took back our lunches home in our lunch kit because we had no time at all to eat them. You were there for 8 hours, and if the machine needed you, you were there. But eventually, after a few months, the machine settled down and it started producing really good paper. And so from July of 1965 until April of 1974, I was a paper maker, as I mentioned, and spending time on all 10 paper machines.